converted man here, since I already did a video where I was just an icon on the screen, avatar icon. Yeah, sure, whatever. Now I'll show my face. Hold on. Gotta make sure to annoy people, though. Yes. Yes, this will annoy those people. You know who you are. Anyways, I'm going to talk about this video. Here we go.
I have heard no atheists answer this critique. If you're just going to comment flying spaghetti monster, sky daddy, you can't convert me, you've already made up your mind. I've been like that before. But then I started to actually hear people out. I saw there's inconsistencies in my worldview, in my paradigm, and that I can't justify my basic assumptions. And so we think that it's a problem, a lack of facts and evidence. We think there's such thing as brute facts that aren't theory-laden, that don't require interpretation, and every fact and every evidence requires interpretation.
Does it? Even if that was true, which I don't know that it is, then that fact that you just stated as a fact would also be subject to its own rule of requiring interpretation, which means that you could then interpret that idea to not be the idea that you just expressed. I don't know. I like to live in the real world where there are brute facts that can be known. There might be mysteries and things that are unknown or maybe even unknowable. And that's fine. Hopefully we'll figure them out. Maybe we won't. Here's a brute fact. This is a blue sheep stuffed, and it is from the Minecraft franchise. Yes, that is a brute fact. Now, there's no way to interpret that other than what was presented. So this idea already starts off rather on shaky ground. So I'm wondering what your argument is going to be. If everything is subject to some sort of interpretation and there's no actual facts, then that also would not be a fact because, it's kind of a problem,
Something like the resurrection of Christ. I can bring that up to an atheist, but they can reinterpret it to fit their worldview.
Well, you certainly can bring up the resurrection of Christ, but the problem is you don't have any actual evidence that that event took place. What you have is like four-ish different stories about this supposed event. So those are written. There's no way to verify that that event actually occurred. We've never before seen a human subject to this sort of suffering and death and then come back to life. So we don't have any reason to think that this time would be different, that this individual would be raised from the dead. Of course, back in Jesus's time, lots of people were coming back from the dead, apparently. So I guess it was more common back then. Lazarus was raised from the dead, for example. A whole bunch of people popped out of their graves and walked around for a while in one of the Gospels, so that happened. But today, in this modern day and age, we have people that are considered dead or called dead, and there's different types of death. There's brain death and heart death, and to recover from that is something that can happen, although it's pretty low chances, especially brain death. We're pretty sure if your brain shows nothing, you're probably not coming back from that. But it can happen with medical technology and modern medicine and all the things we have at our disposal. It can happen. We have seen that's possible within a limited scope. What we have not seen is somebody come back from dead when they were severely injured as Christ supposedly was. The thing is, pointing to that story and saying that this is really an event that really happened without any way to actually demonstrate that it could happen, that it did happen. It's just a story. There's plenty of stories from plenty of other religions as well. I could point to any of the religions and say, well, look, Hinduism, they have the different statues, and they'll pour milk into the mouth of the statue, and it will drink the milk. And this is supposed to be a miracle. Would that convince you that Hinduism is true? There's gurus that supposedly levitate off of the ground. If you saw a guru do that in person, would that convince you that Hinduism was true? Muhammad rode on a flying horse, but that's in a story. Like Jesus coming back from the dead is in a story. So with Hinduism, you have at least two things that you could see with your own eyes today that I don't think would actually convince you that Hinduism is true. Whereas you have a story in Islam that Muhammad flew on this horse. Did that really happen? How would you reinterpret that story? Or would you even think that it actually happened at all? I don't know. That's up to you to answer. Okay.
Oh, it was just mass hallucination. Oh, he actually survived the crucifixion.
Let's see. The disciple, what's this say? The disciples lied about Jesus' resurrection in order to secure for themselves the perks of imprisonment, torture, and martyrdom. Okay, so yeah, that's a bad meme here, and there's many reasons why. Okay, first of all, we don't have anything but the story to go on that Jesus supposedly resurrected. So the counter to this is maybe the disciples just lied. Maybe they made it up. That's possible. Or maybe they were mistaken. Maybe somebody else said that they were Jesus, and that was enough to convince them. After all, even in the biblical stories, they don't recognize Jesus when he comes back. Now, you do have one story, where he has holes that they can poke or whatever. But other than that, they don't seem to recognize Jesus. So could it just be somebody else saying, I'm Jesus, I came back from the dead, and the disciples just believed it because they wanted to? Sure, why not? It's possible. But as far as your little meme here goes, they didn't get imprisoned for anything. Well, the ones that did get imprisoned wasn't really anything to do with Christianity per se. In the couple of cases that we could actually confirm, there's what torture, when, who suffered that, citation required. And martyrdom, none of them really did martyrdom because none of them were martyred for preaching the gospel. And if you have evidence to the contrary, love to see that. Citation required. But anyways, it is also conceivably possible that they did completely fabricate the story in hopes that it would bring them riches and fame and things of that nature, only to, then suffer at the hands of people or whatever. And by then it was too late. They were already dug in too deep, and repenting wouldn't have gotten them anything, because when you're in that sort of situation, it's like, die, repent or die. It's like, well, even if you repent, then your followers are going to exile you and call you a fake prophet, and they'll kill you. So either way, you're screwed. So you might as well, continue the line until death. But this meme is not true. None of these things are true, and atheists don't say this stuff because, well, we know better.
And actually, there was multiple Jesuses. Actually, it was just a lie. Actually, it was just a conspiracy. Whatever it is, we will make explanations to make our worldview, to make our paradigm work. And so,
well, no, it's more like that if I'm going to grant that Jesus existed, sure, why not? Then how do we actually explain the idea that he supposedly came back from the dead and his disciples saw him? Well, I don't see any reason that I need to explain any of that, because the burden of proof is upon the one making that claim to demonstrate that any of that actually happened, which, as I covered, you can't do that. It's written history, but that doesn't mean it really happened. It's written in history, but that it was written long ago doesn't mean it happened, right? So people make up stories and people change stories. Maybe the disciples themselves didn't say that Jesus came back. Maybe the person that actually wrote down the stuff, which was some 70 years later after these events, we don't know who wrote down the first one, but we're pretty sure it wasn't the disciples, any of the disciples themselves. If they did write stuff, that writing is lost to history, because we don't have, well, we just don't have it. Nobody has found it. So, and so it could be that the people that wrote it down, by the time it got to them, that a legend had developed that Jesus came back and the disciples saw it and they wrote that down because that's what the story was. That's a possibility. It's not to justify any particular worldview, it's to explore all the different possibilities that might indeed exist. It's not like this is an established fact of reality and we're trying to explain it away, because it's not an established fact of reality. It is a story, and that's it. And there's multiple possible ways that the story could have unfolded and that we could have what we have today. It could be possible that the disciples made it up. It could be possible that the disciples saw somebody else. It could be possible that none of it happened and somebody came along to write it all down, to write down and make up a religion from whole cloth. It could be that the disciples, some of them did exist and passed on the story word of mouth. And by the time it got to the person that finally wrote it down, that the story had been exaggerated. There's numerous possibilities. And you can't just say, well, that's you making an excuse. No, you're making the excuse to say, no, my story is absolutely real, even though I can't show that it's real. So that's dishonest, not coming up with plausible explanations to what really happened. Because the thing is, when it comes to people coming back from the dead, or at least the sort of dead that Jesus supposedly was, we have no example that anyone can do that. Now you might say, well, but with God, anything is possible. Okay, great. Show somebody that comes back from the dead in the modern day and age under controlled conditions. Show us something that would be a miraculous type of event that would let us think that maybe it's even possible for such a thing to happen.
So, like, what would I need to prove Christianity and God to an atheist?
Well, I can only speak for myself. What you would need is empirical evidence and or a repeatable test and or a valid and sound argument. One of those three things would be great. Now, the first two are way more important than the last one, and usually the only attempt that anyone makes is giving an argument. And every time that I've seen, read, heard an argument, it wasn't valid and sound. In order to even have the hopes of constructing a valid and sound argument, you must learn informal logic and maybe formal logic as well, but that's not completely necessary. It would help, but it's not going to be necessary. Do that. Don't just copy and paste the age-old arguments that already exist on hundreds of websites and apologists make. Come up with a completely new argument, but do so only after learning informal logic. That way your argument will be free of logical fallacies, and that argument will then compel me to look further into the matter. But if it contains one or more fallacies, then I have to be skeptical of its conclusion and point out the fallacies, and hopefully you will correct them because you want an argument that isn't flawed, right? Anyways, but the empirical evidence, that would be great. Again, that would be just, hey, here's God. There it is. That's what God is. Why not? I don't know. I don't know what God's going to look like, so why not? Or here's a repeatable test. Here's something that we can do under controlled conditions that shows that that God is real, that Jesus is real, that miracles can happen, or whatever. So that's what you would need to convince me. Other atheists are different in what their requirements are. I dare say that if you had empirical evidence and a repeatable test, you would prove it to the majority of atheists, though.
They may set up this, arbitrary criteria, but then if it actually happened, would they actually change their worldview?
Well, yes, if you actually had empirical evidence and or a repeatable test for any of these claims, it would actually not just change my worldview, it would change the world itself. Like, tons of people would believe it. Like, you'd have scientists agreeing with you, like every scientist, because what you would have if you had empirical evidence and or a repeatable test is something that could be put into the scientific literature and explored and scrutinized and analyzed, and it would become a scientific theory. And at that point, scientists would support it, and it would become something that we'd have to teach as part of science. But because you don't have any empirical evidence and you don't have any repeatable tests, that's not going to happen. But that's the way it is for all religions, including yours. But if you could do it, yeah, you would definitely win some major prizes, probably get a Nobel Prize, be awarded all sorts of things. It'd be amazing. But even if somebody didn't change their worldview, who cares? You would be like super famous and rich, but you don't have those things, so it's not going to happen. I'm just telling you what would happen if you did have those things.
In the Christian worldview requires you to transform your lifestyle too. And that's the thing, is most of us are stubborn and we're stuck in our comfort zones. We don't really want to challenge our lifestyle. We don't want to change our lifestyle or our worldview.
Okay, so these are two different things. So there's accepting that X is true, and then there's joining X, the group. And these are two very different things. So if you had a demonstrable demonstration with the empirical evidence repeatable test of that this stuff was true, that would certainly, like I said, it would change the world. Forget about me and change the world. Would I join Christianity? I do not know. I say that because the version of Christianity that I see today might not be the actual Christianity that would be proven by the empirical evidence and the repeatable test. Okay, so that version, whatever that is, I don't know what that looks like. So I can't tell you if I would join it or not. I can tell you that the current version of Christianity that I'm aware of, I would have nothing to do with because of what the Bible says. Just the pure, nasty, vile stuff that Yahweh does throughout the Bible, and even Jesus does as well. Some things that are really questionable. I wouldn't want anything to do with that. But if it was true, I would support it being true, but I wouldn't necessarily join that side. But it might turn out that it's actually not the way that I think it is, and it's actually really awesome and amazing. But I don't know what it's really like because so far it appears to be nothing more than mythology. It's just a story that people tell. It's something that people believe in, but that doesn't make it true. It's a faith, not a fact. If it was a fact, you wouldn't need faith. You would just present the facts. So that would certainly compel me to promote it as fact, but depending on what it's really like, I don't know that I would join it. It just depends.
And this isn't just about religion, because even like if someone's overweight, they know that eating healthy and that working out is going to be good for them. They objectively know that. Or smokers know that smoking is bad for them. But does that get them to stop? A lot of them know this, but we're stuck in our comfort zone, we're stubborn, or whatever the reason is. And so if we think about the most basic dogmas of Christianity, atheism, the Big Bang, and then new.
I'm going to have to dissuade you of that notion. The Big Bang has nothing to do with atheism at all. Not even a little. So I don't know who told you that lie. The Big Bang is a scientific theory, and it is provable through observable and testable methodologies. So your problem is with cosmologists, not atheists. If you have problems with accepting Big Bang cosmology, take it up with cosmologists, not atheists. It has nothing to do with atheism at all. Now, granted, atheists tend to accept science because we don't have any problems with reality.
Species, Darwinian, macro.
Okay, so you have a problem with science, which isn't atheism. So these things, again, are science. So you have problems with biological evolution, take that up with a biologist. Maybe read some biology books, just an idea. And if you want to, learn what biological evolution actually is. It's nothing to do with atheism. It's just how things actually work for real in the real world. If there is a God, both the Big Bang, the Big Bang is probably correct model. We're not 100% sure on that, but evolution, biological evolution, absolutely true, and God would have used it if there's a God at all. So yeah, your problems aren't with atheism with these things. Your problems are with science.
Evolution overall this time, and then Christianity, we have the biblical miracles and the resurrection, and we both believe these. We never saw these.
No, I'm sorry, you're wrong there. Biological evolution has been empirically watched, verified, and tested for multiple times in multiple ways. So we have witnessed biological evolution happen, both in the lab and in just nature. The thing with biological evolution is it takes a while. So usually you're going to have to take like bacteria or something to watch those multiply, divide, and change. And as far as watching stuff in the wild, well, there's a couple of geckos that came to, I think it was California, and one went north, the other went south. And when the scientists took these geckos, they wouldn't mate with each other. They couldn't mate. They couldn't have babies anymore because they had they were so different from each other after a few years had passed. So because one had adapted to heat and the other adapted to colder conditions, so they just couldn't have babies anymore together. And you can see biological evolution in action with dog breeding or cat breeding. So that is constrained biological evolution, where humans are selecting traits that they want to see and keeping the traits and not breeding the traits that they want. That is biological evolution in action. Then there's plenty of other ways to observe biological evolution, and there's plenty of ways to test it. So again, your problems are with science here, not atheism. I would just encourage you to learn science in general and biological evolution in particular, which has been observed. Now, as far as Big Bang cosmology, Yeah, the background radiation has definitely been observed, and the mathematical theorems are ones that we can test, and we will make predictions, and those predictions have turned out to be correct, which support the theory. But to understand that stuff, you're going to have to understand science. So I'm also going to implore you to learn science on top of informal logic.
But we both believe these. But what are the assumptions? Prior to the physical, the metaphysical.
Okay, so this is you, not a me problem. Metaphysical is philosophical terminology, and it can mean anything to anybody depending on the way that you frame this definition of it. Uh, but basically, it's ideas. There you go. Basically, so unless you have proof that it's a thing, you don't have anything. So, what about the metaphysical?
We have a lot of assumptions in this that, the Big Bang and macroevolution, that physics, math, that everything operated in time, always operated in the same way. So,
Well, there's no reason to think that time would ever operate a different way. So, there's no assumption that needs to be made there. Again, I think that this is you not understanding science and has nothing to do with atheism. So, just learn science. That's it. Yeah, metaphysics. Well, yeah, well, that's one version of metaphysics. So, metaphysics is a branch of philosophy that deals with which is fundamental in reality. That's one version of metaphysics. What he might mean by metaphysics is something else, possibly. Who knows? But as far as these assumptions that you think that we're making, I don't know that we are making them. But even if we are, so what? If they turn out to be right every time, I think that they're warranted.
that's an assumption. And now, is that assumption justified? And this isn't the only assumption. I mean, there's lots of assumptions. Like, how do we assume in justified logic? Why
What?
does logic exist? The atheist.
Why does logic exist? Well, it depends what you mean by logic. Because when I say the word logic, I refer to informal logic and, well, to some extent, formalized logic, which are both branches of philosophy that deal with the structure of argumentation. In informal logic, you learn how to analyze the syllogisms for logical fallacies, and you use common language to do so. In formal logic, you use symbols and rigorous formulas to solve the various formulas that are constructed by the logician. So that one's a little bit harder. There's also mathematical logic, which is its own thing, and that's separate from informal and formal logic, but does share some characteristics with it. There are logic gates that work in mathematics and in circuitry and to some degree in informal logic as well. So all of these things that we could call logic exist because we humans have labeled things in such a way that we created these terms for these ideas. Now, that doesn't make them useless because we created them. It just if it doesn't work, if it's no good, if it doesn't do anything, then yeah, it's useless. Mathematics is something that we figured out how it works and what operations do and what they're supposed to do and how all of that works. And if you run the formula and you run it correctly, you get the certain result that you're supposed to get. And that's it. With informal logic, the formula of the syllogism must be a certain format. And if it's not, then you did it wrong. And then as far as the logical fallacies, well, there's a lot of those, but identifying those is important. And if you identify one, then the argument's one that you're going to have to be skeptical of the conclusion, which really means you should make a new argument because you want to get rid of that fallacy. So these things work. When you write out the formula, you can see that it works. You can test it, and it works every time. A is B, B is C, A is C. Why? Well, because that's how that works. Why does it work that way? Well, because you go, okay, A is actually also B, and B is also actually C, so C will be A as well, whatever A happens to be. You're just replacing the words with the letters with placeholders. Okay, it's kind of like in algebra how you'll see X. It's like find X. There it is. It's on the Okay, but why does it exist? Because we humans made it to some extent. Now it's usable in the real world because it applies to the real world. But if there were no humans, and assuming there's no other intelligent life out there in the universe, math isn't a thing anymore. It would still, all the functions of it would still work, but there'd be nobody to know that it worked anymore. So that's the best I can do to answer your question on why, because why is a tough one. I'm not even sure I answered why. I think I answered how it works. Why is it here? I don't know. Humans are weird.
This paradigm it doesn't make any sense that something like math, logic.
Okay, whether or not something makes sense to you is completely and wholly irrelevant. This is one of those logical fallacies that I was talking about. This one is appeal to personal incredulity. I don't understand it, therefore must be false. Actually, no, I said that wrong. Sorry. Appeal to ignorance. This is an appeal to ignorance. I don't understand, therefore it must be wrong. Appeal to personal incredulity is I can't believe that this is true, therefore it must be false. Yeah, it's easy to get the two mixed up every now and again. But I fixed it, so it's okay.
Philosophy, all these things exist in a world that is in constant chaos and flux. Why should someone be ethical?
Okay, I want to go back and see what the meme was. You keep popping these memes on the screen.
Philosophy, all these things exist in a world that is in constant chaos.
Okay, so let's see what he says here. Remember thou, man, thou art dust, and dust thou shall return. Your religion so irrelevant. We are all made of stardust. Wow, science so profound. Well, we are made of stardust. That is true. It's also true that, the other one's also true. In a way, but it's cooler that we're made of stardust than just dust, but whatever.
Chaos and flux. Why should someone be ethical?
Okay, so why should someone be ethical? Well, that has nothing to do with anything else that you're speaking of at all. Ethics are completely separate to all these other issues that you seem to have with reality. Why should you be ethical? I don't know. Are you a good guy? Do you want to be a good guy? Yes? Okay. Well, then that's why. Because you want to do good. Do you want to do bad? Then do bad. Now, society will probably stop you at some point from doing bad if the bad is bad enough. Now, maybe you'll get away with it, but people around you won't trust you if you're constantly bad. There is honor among thieves, so to speak. So your successfulness in life is dependent upon your behavior. So sociopaths that go against the grain, if you will, have to move places if they don't want to fit in. So it's like they, like, or say, not sociopaths, but let's just say the serial killer for a more dramatic example. So after killing a whole bunch of people in one place, well, they don't want to get caught, so they're going to have to go somewhere else. In fact, they're going to have to go somewhere far away from where they were. And they're also going to have to change the pattern of how they kill people so they won't get caught. But, well, humans are creatures of habit, and it's hard to do that. So that person might indeed get caught. Why are they behaving that way? Well, maybe there's a psychological reason for it. Maybe their brain is quite off. Maybe there's some damage happened to their head or what have you. Or maybe they took the wrong sort of drugs, or maybe they took the right sort of drugs in the wrong way. Who knows? But why we should be ethical is because we are, broadly speaking, creatures that are social creatures. We like each other's company, so to speak, broadly speaking. Not everybody, but most people do. There's some people that I wouldn't want to hang out with, but there's some people I do want to hang out with. So in order for me to hang out with those people, I have to treat them nicely, or they won't want to hang out with me anymore. So there's one reason why I should be ethical, purely as a selfish motivation. I want to hang around people, so I need to be nice. There's plenty of other answers to that question, and there's plenty of ethical systems out there. And I would advise you to look them up and explore each one because they're all interesting.
I mean, there's no ethics. It's just random chaos. There's no meaning.
Well, there are ethics, whether or not it is all chaos and that we are indeed Stardust. We are, in fact, Stardust. And it's weird because you had the other thing was dust. So why would that also not be whatever? Whether or not there's a grand meaning to life as we know it is irrelevant to the question of many ethical systems. Some ethical systems consider it as part of it, but not all. You can have ethics without a God. In fact, many ethical systems function just fine without it. In fact, there's only one ethical system that requires God. It's called DCT. I did a video on it called DCT. Go check out my video, DCT, about divine command theory. That's what it stands for. DCT. DCT. Okay.
And if there is meaning, it's arbitrary. It's human-made.
So, why does that matter? We made the rules of chess. It's arbitrary. But do you want to play chess? Well, then you're going to play by the rules that chess is played by. If you don't play by those rules, then you're not playing chess anymore. I say, well, but it's my version of chess. Well, okay. But unless I agree to play it, we're not going to be able to play that game. So we then set up the rules and we agree to follow those rules. And if you don't, then I don't play with you anymore. There you go. Simple as that. In the same way, ethics are set up by humans, and arbitrary or not, if you don't follow those systems, nobody wants to play with you anymore.
Versus in the Christian paradigm, we can perfectly account for math, physics, logic, all these things. We can justify our claims.
No, you really actually can't, because what you're doing is you're adding to a problem. You're saying, okay, how do I explain reality? God did it. Okay, now how do I explain God? Where does God live? Where is God located? What does God look like? What does God's brain, how does that work? Does God even have a brain? If it doesn't have a brain, then how does it have a mind? If it can talk, then it needs vocal cords to do so. How does that work? Now, where is heaven located? And Jesus supposedly ascended into heaven with his body. How does that work? Where did his body go? If heaven is not here in the physical realm, then where is his body? Was his body taken apart into non-physical things? Or what? How does any of that work? How do angels work? What are angels? Where are angels? Are there angels? What about the devil or the demons? Do they exist? How does hell work? Where's hell located? You don't know. There's no way to answer that. So what you've done is say, well, God answers all these questions, and then you have more questions about God that you cannot hope to answer. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Any amount you want. So what you need is an explanation of the explanation. Saying, well, I can justify it. Well, yeah, so can other religions. They can say that as well. But the justification has to be shown to be true in and of itself, which you haven't done yet. So that's a problem.
Atheist, justify logic, please. Give an explanation that you can't just say logic just is.
Logic just is. I just said the thing you said I couldn't say. Yeah, but no, I already explained this. So yeah,
These things are so fundamental to how we live. To not live with, trusting the past or trusting logic is just completely, it wouldn't work.
well, I don't know. Seems like you're doing a pretty good job doing it. You don't trust the past because you don't seem to trust aspects of science, which are in the past and in the present as well. But yet you continue to exist just fine, denying reality. Anyways,
A world without God, a world without logic and this consistency, the universe.
okay, you don't need a God to have logic and consistency. You just need a universe that has at least one law of the universe. There has to be at least one rule. And then everything else unfolds from that one law or that one rule. You cannot have a paradoxical universe. It's incoherent. So you don't need a God to do any of that. But God then brings up its own problems because God also has to be justified. So how would you justify God? You can't just say, well, God just is, because you told me I can't say that about logic. So then you can't say that about God. But that's all you really could say about God is, well, God just exists. Why? Why does God exist? Why is it your God instead of some other God? Why is there God rather than not God? Because it's a fundamental brute force of reality? That might be your answer. If so, why can't my answer about logic be the same? Just because you don't like it? Tough. Whatever the answer actually is what the answer is, whether you like it or not. It just seems like you don't understand a lot of things. And asking the atheist to justify anything does nothing for your burden of proof. You need to prove that your idea of God is true, and you haven't done that yet. So you can say that your idea of God justifies any given thing, but you have to actually demonstrate it. That's your burden. Once you've done that, then fine. I'll do all. Well, I'm already justifying logic anyways and explaining it to you as best as I can, and I'm sure others can do better. But nonetheless, after I've done all this work, will you actually prove that there's God? No. What you'll do is resort to arguments that are full of logical fallacies if you are like all the other Christians that I've encountered thus far and or other religious people. It seems like you're a Christian, but I could be wrong. But I'm not. Okay.
Uniformity of nature, it would never happen. And so how do you actually know anything? We always have to refer to the past, inductive reasoning. How do you know something?
You know stuff because you have a brain. I don't know. A lot of your questions seem like they could just be answered by a cursory overview of science.
Past knowledge. And so if you can't even justify the past and logic, how can you justify anything? How can you even justify knowledge? It makes knowledge impossible because you have to refer to the past, which there is no justification for. So,
well, that's just incoherent. There certainly is justification for the past in all sorts of different ways. So I don't know where you're going with this. There are problems in justifying your idea of what happened in the past, referring to Jesus coming back from the dead, because we don't have any example of that sort of thing. If you have an example, then show me that example. I'd love to see it. But there aren't any, as far as I'm aware, examples of any miracles. And of course, then the question of how you would identify a miracle is also one that was worth asking and exploring.
So can an atheist please give an account in their paradigm for logic?
Well, I explain logic, but I also want to dissuade you of the notion that there's an atheist paradigm. There isn't. Atheism doesn't prescribe anything to anyone. It is purely a descriptive word. It is not God. Whatever God is, I don't believe it. That's atheist. Okay? Do you believe in God? No, you're an atheist. Do you think that there's no God? Yeah, I think there's no God. You're an atheist. That's it. Doesn't tell you anything else. It doesn't make you follow. You could believe in a heaven and angels and demons and devils, a hell, Satan, an afterlife. As long as God isn't among those things that you believe in, you're an atheist. That's, yeah. Not very many atheists do believe in that sort of stuff. But you could be an atheist and believe in everything and anything except for God and still technically be an atheist. So, yeah. Anyways, I don't know where you're going with this. So.
Please, it does not make any sense.
Oh yeah, the paradigm. So yeah, there isn't an atheistic worldview, okay? And that it doesn't make sense to you doesn't make it invalid. All right. So yeah, it only took me 50 minutes. I'm not even done with your video. I'm gonna call it for now and say I'm gonna do a part 2 on this because, oh man, maybe he'll come and talk to me on air, and so we'll do it there. We'll do part 2 by speaking to him directly if he decides to contact me, and that will be a thing. So yeah, that's all I've got for him for now. Cayenne Bayesian, if you want to talk to me live, you could set up a thing. I'm not doing anything now. I could set up another live stream and have you come in and we can talk about your ideas. You want to do that? Huh? 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 Giving them a few minutes to decide whether or not they want to talk to me live. Okay, so yeah, that's 3:54, and it took me this long to talk about stuff. Oh man. All right, well, I'm calling it for now, and we'll do part 2 whenever. And I don't know if Cayenne Bayesian wants to talk to me live or not. So if they do, they can email me, I guess. My email is deconvertedman. Okay, they'd be down. Great, we can do it now. Do you want to do it now? I'll set up another hangout. And we'll do it then. Yeah, right now. Or do you want to do it later? If you want to do it later, email me. All right. I gotta hit the end button on this though. So yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. And yeah. So I guess Cayenne, yeah, I'll set up a temporary hangout and see if they join in or whatever. That's what I'll do. All right.